Well, hello there. Today's video was requested by my friend Michael Cranny, aka Andro656. Mike is a guy who loves The Punisher, and I don't blame him. The Punisher is a tragic character with a lot of depth, and we'll explore him in one of the segments of the review. I only wish that far-right chuds hadn't co-opted his skull symbol and turned it into one of their own, because now I can't wear a bunch of my shirts without people thinking I'm some kind of asshole. Now on with the show.
Wow.
Greetings, friends, and welcome back to the 3-Minute Horror Show. My name is Ben, your host, and sometimes I don't watch horror movies. But I do watch the bad movies so that you don't have to. You're welcome. Today I'll be reviewing the movie The Punisher from 2004. Now, if you're new here, I already know what you're thinking. This isn't a horror movie. What the heck, man? Well, I don't know, but there's a lot of brutal violence in this one, so it's kind of horror adjacent. But The Punisher 2004 won the March poll for non-horror movies, and here we are. If you have a non-horror movie that you'd like to see in April, please let me know in the comments. I'll add it to the poll, and we'll see what gets picked next. This movie was written and directed by Jonathan Hensley. He also wrote Armageddon, that movie where Bruce Willis saves the world from a meteor or something. Now, last I heard, The Punisher from 2004 was streaming here in Canada on Disney+. I don't know if that's still the case, but I have it kicking around here on DVD. We open on two groups of people engaged in an arms deal. A pair of men representing the Saint Mafia family and a group of Russian arms manufacturers represented by a man named Otto Krieg. Their deal is interrupted by the FBI and several of the criminals are shot to death, including Krieg and one of the Mafia boss Howard Saint's sons. It turns out that Krieg was actually FBI undercover agent Frank Castle, and Howard Saint, who's played by John Travolta, is very crusty about the situation. Frank goes home to enjoy some time off before being assigned to the London office where he won't have to do undercover work any longer. And his family are having a big vacation in Puerto Rico. And his dad is Roy Scheider from Jaws. Well, the consigliere of Howard Saint, Quentin Glass, figures out who Frank is, and they send a squad of killers out to eliminate Castle's entire family. Even when you know it's coming, it's still tough to watch his wife and child being killed by these goons. The Mafia believe that they've eliminated Frank as well, and so that should be the end of that. The Punisher is a very popular anti-hero character that exists within the Marvel Comics universe. He was initially introduced as a Spider-Man villain in 1974, but over time became arguably one of that universe's most loved characters. Somewhat similar to what happens at the beginning of this movie, in the comic books, Frank Castle's campaign of vigilante justice against crime began with the death of his wife and his 2 kids. They witnessed a mafia murder in Central Park, and they were executed as a result, with Frank being left for dead. In the 1980s, the Punisher became a major character in the Daredevil comic book series, courtesy of celebrated writer Frank Miller. And the character was so popular after this run that he went on to get his own series of books, including a very dark, very adult storyline by Garth Ennis in the early 2000s. I agree with Miller's assessment of Frank Castle as a character. The Punisher is a hero, but he's not heroic. He's not someone that you should look up to, or ever want to emulate. Castle is not killed, however, despite being shot a bunch of times, blown up, and drowned. He's picked up by a local witch doctor, and I assume he's nursed back to health. When he's good and ready, the witch doctor takes Frank back to the family compound, where Frank takes his dad's guns, and the Good Luck Charm skull t-shirt that was a present from his son. It's literally the Punisher skull t-shirt. He also says cool guy stuff like this.
God's gonna sit this one out.
Luckily, after this, Frank is able to find an apartment in the same building with our comic relief. We have Spacker Dave, played by Ben Foster, Bumpo, played by Jonathan Pinette, rest in peace, and Joan, played by Rebecca Romaine. They all watch Frank build himself a kitted-out black Pontiac GTO. He announces the fact that he's still alive to the press, something that I wouldn't have done, and then he starts hitting Saint's businesses. Understanding that Saint runs a banking operation for other criminals, he hits the money first, distributing the funds of Cuban brothers that bank with Saint to the general public. The Punisher has been brought to life on the screen many times since his creation. The first on-screen appearance of Frank Castle was in a 1989 straight-to-video feature called The Punisher, starring Dolph Lundgren as the titular character. Great liberties were taken with this story, including having him operate out of the sewer and no incorporation of the iconic skull logo. The movie we're talking about today was the second big screen adaptation of The Punisher, and there was a sequel planned until it was ultimately cancelled. It went through absolute development hell, with multiple directors signing on and then leaving due to creative differences, including Rob Zombie. That cancelled sequel went on to become The Punisher Warzone, starring Ray Stevenson in 2008. Now, I haven't actually seen that one myself yet. I know, bad fan, but I hear it's very violent and lots of fun. Thomas Jane, our Punisher from this movie, came back to reprise the role of Frank Castle in an independently produced short called Dirty Laundry in 2012. It co-starred Ron Perlman, it screened at a comic book convention, and naturally, there was no theatrical release of the movie. Fast forward to today, where we are absolutely spoiled with the current MCU version of Frank Castle, portrayed by Jon Bernthal. He's my ultimate Punisher actor, and I love what he brings to the character. But I've talked long enough. Let's get back to the movie. Frank drowns his sorrows in a lot of Wild Turkey Kentucky bourbon, and then Howard Saint realizes that he's going to need to kill Castle all over again. He starts sending weird hitters after him. First is a guy named Harry Heck, who comes into Joan's diner, sings Frank a little song while he's eating breakfast, and then tries to kill him. Next is the Russian, a bleach blonde big sexy Kevin Nash, which leads to one hell of a fight. Frank manages to end the Russian, but is quite injured and needs to remain hidden afterwards. Saint's crew enters the apartment buildings and interrogates Spacker Dave as to Frank's whereabouts by pulling his piercings out with pliers. I hated this. It really upset me, but Dave took it and Frank thanked him for it. And this is where the Punisher movie made me cry. Now Frank has everything in place to get his final revenge against the Saint crime family. All he needs to do is a 3-minute gearing up montage scene and then he can get on with the job. And it is very satisfying. This movie was definitely a departure from its source material, but if you take it on its own, it's a very entertaining experience.
Yep.
That being said, I don't really buy John Travolta as a big villain.
Nope.
I don't think he's a very good actor, and I find him to be very overrated. Fight me in the comments. Thomas Jane is good, but not great. But take that with a grain of salt, because I've been spoiled with the Jon Bernthal version of Frank Castle that I think is perfect. Overall, I really liked this, despite the liberties that they took with one of my favorite comic book characters. I rate The Punisher a 7 out of 10. As always, a link to my letterboxd appears in the video's description. Please leave me a like, comment, and subscribe, as it really does boost my engagement and helps my channel grow. Smell you later, nerds.
You're that boy in the newspaper. Came back from the dead.